Jake Martinez wiped the sweat from his forehead as he worked under the main engine of the starship Aurora Dawn. The engine room was always hot, but today it felt worse than usual. He had been fixing small problems all morning. A loose wire here, a broken sensor there. Nothing too serious, but enough to keep him busy. Jake was 28 years old and had been working on spaceships for 6 years. He was not the smartest engineer in the galaxy, but he was good at fixing things. Other people might know more about fancy technology, but Jake could make almost anything work again with just basic tools and some creative thinking. The Aurora Dawn was not like the warships that most people heard about in stories. It was a research ship. Scientists from different alien species worked together to study new planets and discover new forms of life. Jake was one of only 12 humans on the ship. The rest of the crew came from 6 different alien species. Most of the aliens were friendly enough. Some were curious about humans, while others mostly ignored him. Jake did not mind. He preferred working with machines anyway. Machines were simple. They either worked or they did not. People were much more complicated. The ship shook slightly as it moved through space. They were traveling to a new star system that had never been explored before. Captain Lisa Ford, the human commander of the ship, had told everyone they might find interesting things there. Maybe new planets with strange life forms or old ruins from ancient civilizations. Jake was checking the power cables when the first alarm started ringing. It was a soft beeping sound that meant something minor was wrong. He looked up from his work and listened. Sometimes the computer systems gave false alarms, so he was not too worried. Then a second alarm joined the first one. This one was louder and had a different tone. Jake frowned. 2 alarms at the same time usually meant something more serious was happening. Before he could think about it more, a third alarm started screaming through the ship. This one was the emergency alarm that meant everyone was in danger. Jake dropped his tools and ran toward the main computer panel. The screen showed red warning messages everywhere. Hull breach in Section 7. Hull breach in Section 12. Atmosphere leaking from decks 4 and 5. Emergency force fields activated. All crew report to emergency stations. Jake's heart started beating faster. Hull breaches meant something had torn holes in the ship's outer wall. If too many holes opened up, everyone on the ship could die. The force fields would hold for a while, but they used a lot of power. If the ship lost power, the force fields would fail. He grabbed the communication device from his belt and called the bridge. "Captain Ford, this is Jake in engineering. I can see multiple hull breaches on my screen." "What happened?" Captain Ford's voice came through the speaker, sounding stressed but calm. "We hit a debris field, Jake. Looks like the remains of an old space battle. Thousands of metal pieces floating around, some as big as cars. We're trying to navigate through it, but some pieces got through our shields." Jake looked at his screens again. The ship's automatic repair systems were working, but they were overloaded. Too many problems to fix at once. "Captain, the repair systems can't keep up. If we get many more holes, we're going to be in real trouble." "I know, Jake. Do what you can. We're almost through the debris field." Jake started working as fast as he could. He rerouted power from non-essential systems to make the force field stronger. He sent repair robots to the worst breaches first. He shut down some research equipment to save power for life support systems. The ship kept shaking as more pieces of debris hit the hull. Each impact made Jake worry that this might be the hit that broke through completely. He could hear the crew running through the hallways outside the engine room, heading to their emergency positions. Then Jake heard Captain Ford's voice over the ship's communication system, talking to everyone at once. "All crew, we have a serious problem. Zarathek was sealing a breach in Section 9 when debris damaged her environmental suit. Her suit is failing, and she needs help immediately." Jake knew Zarathek. She was one of the Vexhai, an insect-like alien species. The Vexhai looked sort of like giant praying mantises, but they were very intelligent and peaceful. Zarathek was the ship's expert on alien biology. She studied new life forms whenever they found them. The problem was that Vexhai could not survive in normal ship atmosphere. They needed a special mix of gases and a very specific temperature. Their environmental suits provided everything they needed to stay alive outside their home planet. If Zarathek's suit was broken, she would die within a few hours. Captain Ford continued talking. The suit's damage is beyond our normal repair systems. We need someone who understands complex technology. The automatic systems are too busy with hull repairs to help. Is there anyone who thinks they can fix Vex-High technology? Jake stopped working and listened. He knew that Vex-High technology was supposed to be very advanced. Most aliens considered it far beyond what humans could understand. The Vex-High had been building spaceships for thousands of years before humans even learned to make fire. But Jake also knew that all technology followed the same basic rules. Electricity flowed through circuits. Computers processed information. Life support systems moved air and controlled temperature. The details might be different, but the basic ideas were the same everywhere. The communication system was quiet. Nobody was volunteering to help. Jake could understand why. If someone tried to fix the suit and failed, Zarathek would die. Nobody wanted that responsibility. Jake thought about Zarathek. She had always been kind to him. When he first joined the ship, she had taken time to explain how different alien species worked together. She had shown him pictures of her home planet and told him about Vex-High culture. She had never acted like she was smarter than him just because her species was more advanced. Now she was dying, and nobody was helping her. Jake picked up his communication device. Captain Ford, this is Jake. I'll try to fix her suit. There was a pause before the captain answered. Jake, are you sure? Vex-High technology is very complex. If you make a mistake, I know, Captain. But if nobody tries, she'll die anyway. At least this way she has a chance. All right, Jake. Report to Medical Bay 3. That's where we're keeping her while we monitor her condition. Jake grabbed his toolkit and ran through the corridors toward the medical bay. As he ran, he could feel the ship still shaking from debris impacts. Emergency lights flashed red in the hallways. Crew members moved quickly from place to place trying to handle the crisis. He reached the medical bay and found Zarathek lying on a table. Her environmental suit was a complex piece of equipment that covered her entire body. It looked like a second skin made of metal and plastic with tubes and wires running everywhere. Parts of it were sparking and smoking. Dr. Corvin, a tall alien with blue skin and large eyes, was standing next to her. The Zentaurians, like Dr. Corvin, were proud of their intelligence and technology. He looked at Jake with surprise. You cannot be serious, Dr. Corvin said. This is Vex-High bio-integrated technology. Your species barely understands basic space travel. Jake ignored the insult and looked at Zarathek. Her large compound eyes looked tired, and her breathing was getting harder. How long does she have? Perhaps 2 hours, Dr. Corvin replied. Maybe 3 if we are fortunate. Jake knelt down next to the table and opened his toolkit. Then I better get started. Jake looked at Zarathek's suit carefully. It was unlike anything he had ever seen before. The metal seemed to move slightly as if it were alive. Thin wires that looked more like veins ran under the surface. Small lights blinked in patterns he did not understand. Zarathek tried to speak, but her voice was weak. Jake, you should not. This technology is too complex for. Save your strength, Jake said gently. Let me worry about the technology. Dr. Corvin crossed his arms and watched Jake with doubt in his large eyes. This is foolishness. The suit uses quantum biological interfaces. It takes our best scientists years to understand such systems. How can a human possibly? Maybe I can't, Jake interrupted. But I'm going to try anyway. Jake started by examining the damaged areas. The suit had been hit by several pieces of debris. Some of the outer panels were cracked. Sparks came from broken connections. But the real problem seemed to be deeper inside the system. He pulled out a small scanner from his toolkit. It was a simple device that could detect electrical problems. As he moved it over the suit, he saw that power was not flowing correctly through many parts of the system. The power distribution is messed up, Jake said, mostly to himself. Something is causing a cascade failure. Dr. Corvin looked surprised. How did you determine that so quickly? Jake shrugged. Same way I'd diagnose any electrical system. You follow the power flow and see where it stops working. He continued scanning. The suit was incredibly complex, but Jake tried to ignore the fancy parts and focus on the basics. Every machine needed power to work. Every computer needed to process information. Every life support system needed to move air and control temperature. Zarathek's breathing was getting worse. Her skin, which was normally a bright green color, was starting to turn darker. Jake knew he was running out of time. The electromagnetic interference from the debris field caused feedback in the power systems, Jake explained as he worked. It's like a short circuit, but instead of just burning out one component, it's creating a chain reaction that's shutting down everything connected to it. Dr. Corvin moved closer to watch. Even if you are correct about the cause, how do you propose to fix it? The damaged components are integrated with her biological systems. You cannot simply replace them. Jake nodded. That was the real problem. In a normal machine, he could just remove the broken parts and put in new ones. But this suit was connected directly to Zarathek's body. The technology interfaced with her nervous system, her blood circulation, even her brain functions. Alain, have to rebuild the power pathways while she's still wearing the suit, Jake said, basically doing surgery on both the machine and her biology at the same time. Impossible, Dr. Corvin declared. The biointegration points are too delicate. One mistake could kill her instantly. Jake looked at his scanner readings again. The, power failures were spreading. Soon the suit would stop working completely. What choice do we have? If I don't try, she dies anyway. He started by carefully removing some of the outer panels of the suit. Underneath, he could see the incredible complexity of Vex-high technology. Circuits that seemed to grow like living tissue. Processors that looked more like organs than machines. Fluid-filled tubes that carried both electrical current and biological nutrients. But Jake forced himself to ignore how strange everything looked. Instead, he focused on what each component was supposed to do. This part regulated temperature. That part filtered air. This section monitored brain activity. As he worked, other crew members came to watch. Word had spread through the ship that a human was trying to fix advanced alien technology. Some were curious. Others were skeptical. A few seemed to think he was crazy. Captain Ford arrived and stood quietly in the corner. She watched Jake work, without saying anything, but he could feel her tension. As the ship's commander, she was responsible for everyone's safety. If Jake failed, she would have to explain to Zarathek's family and the Vex-high government why their crew member had died. Jake found the main power regulation hub deep inside the suit. It was a small device about the size of his fist, covered in bioorganic material. Several important circuits connected to it, but the electromagnetic interference had damaged the delicate quantum processors inside. I can't fix this component, Jake admitted. It's too advanced and I don't have the right replacement parts. Dr. Corvin nodded sadly. Then there is nothing to be done. But Jake was not ready to give up. He looked at his toolkit and tried to think creatively. He did not have Vex-high replacement parts, but he had human technology. It was simpler and cruder, but it followed the same basic principles. What if I don't try to fix it? Jake said slowly. What if I bypass it completely? He started pulling components from his toolkit. A power regulator from a coffee maker that could control temperature precisely. A sensor array from a navigation computer that could monitor biological functions. Conductive fibers from his own uniform that could carry electrical current. Dr. Corvin watched in amazement as Jake began connecting human technology to the alien suit. This should not work. The interfaces are completely incompatible. Interfaces can be adapted, Jake said as he carefully spliced wires together. The real question is whether the basic functions will work well enough. He created makeshift adapters using simple electronic components. He rerouted power through backup circuits that the original designers had probably never intended to use. He improvised solutions for problems that the suit's creators had solved with advanced quantum technology. Zarathek's condition was getting worse. Her compound eyes were starting to close and her breathing was very shallow. Jake worked faster, his hands steady despite the pressure. How do you know this will work? Dr. Corvin asked, echoing the question that everyone in the room was thinking. Jake paused in his work, and looked up. I don't know if it will work perfectly, but I know it will work well enough. What do you mean? Human engineering is different from other species, Jake explained as he continued working. We don't always build the best solution. We build the solution that works with what we have available. Sometimes that's actually better because it's more flexible. He finished connecting the last bypass circuit and carefully activated the modified system. For a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the lights on Zarathek's suit began to stabilize. Her breathing became easier. The color started returning to her skin. The monitoring equipment showed that her atmospheric mixture was returning to normal levels. Her body temperature was stabilizing. The bio-integration points were functioning correctly. Dr. Corvin stared at the readings in disbelief. Remarkable. The human's crude technology is actually maintaining all critical functions. Captain Ford stepped forward and checked the monitors herself. Jake, you did it. Her vital signs are stabilizing. Jake sat back and wiped the sweat from his face. His hands were shaking slightly from the stress and concentration. The repairs should hold until we can get to a proper HFY repair facility. It's not pretty, but it'll keep her alive. Zarathek opened her eyes and looked at Jake. Her voice was still weak but much clearer than before. You saved my life. I do not understand how you accomplished this, but you have given me back my future. Jake smiled and started packing up his tools. Just doing my job. Besides, the ship needs its biology expert. We've got a lot more exploring to do. But as Jake prepared to leave, he noticed that Zarathek was looking at him with an expression he had never seen before. There was gratitude in her large, compound eyes, but also something else. Something that looked almost like reverence. He had no way of knowing that what he had just done would create the biggest cultural misunderstanding of his life. Over the next few hours, word of Jake's successful repair spread throughout the ship. Crew members from different species came to the medical bay to see the impossible sight of human technology keeping a HFY alive. Dr. Corvin had been studying the modifications Jake made, taking detailed scans and measurements. His attitude toward the human engineer had changed completely. Where before he had been dismissive and condescending, now he seemed genuinely fascinated. I have been examining your work, Dr. Corvin told Jake. What you accomplished should not be possible according to our understanding of biotechnological integration. Jake was sitting in the corner of the medical bay, drinking coffee and keeping an eye on Zarathek's condition. The makeshift repairs were holding well, but he wanted to be nearby in case anything went wrong. It's not that complicated, Jake said. I just looked at what each part was supposed to do and found a different way to do the same thing. But the quantum biological interfaces require precise calibration at the molecular level, Dr. Corvin insisted. Your human components are far too crude to achieve such precision. Jake shrugged. Maybe they don't need to be that precise. Maybe the original designers just made it more complicated than it needed to be. This statement seemed to shock Dr. Corvin. Are you suggesting that HFY technology is inefficient? Not inefficient, Jake clarified. Just over-engineered. Sometimes the simple solution works just as well as the complex one. Dr. Corvin pulled up a holographic display showing the internal structure of Zarathek's suit. The original HFY components were shown in blue, while Jake's human additions were highlighted in red. The contrast was striking. The alien technology was elegant and sophisticated, with flowing curves and organic shapes. The human parts looked crude and blocky by comparison, but somehow, they worked together perfectly. Explain to me how you determined which components to use, Dr. Corvin requested. Your selection seems random, yet it functions flawlessly. Jake stood up and pointed to different parts of the display. The coffee maker's temperature regulator can maintain heat within 2 degrees, just like the original biothermal control system. The navigation sensors can track multiple variables simultaneously, so they can monitor her biological functions. The conductive fibers from my uniform can carry electrical current just as well as the quantum conductors. They're just not as efficient. But how did you know these substitutions would work? I didn't know for sure, Jake admitted. But I understood the basic principles. Temperature control is temperature control. whether you're making coffee or keeping someone alive. Monitoring systems are monitoring systems, whether you're tracking star positions or biological functions. Dr. Corvin looked puzzled. This approach seems very unscientific. How can you proceed without certainty? Jake laughed. Doc, if I waited until I was certain about everything, I'd never get anything done. Sometimes you have to make your best guess and see what happens. Captain Ford had been listening to their conversation from across the room. Now she approached them with a thoughtful expression. Jake, I think what you've done here is bigger than just saving Zarathek's life. You've demonstrated something important about human problem solving. What do you mean, Captain? Think about it. Every other species we've met has very rigid approaches to technology. The Vexhi use biointegration. The Zentarians use quantum computing. The Shardneth use crystalline matrices. Each species sticks to their own methods. Jake nodded. Yeah, I've noticed that. They all seem to think their way is the only way. But humans don't think like that, Captain Ford continued. We're willing to mix and match, to use whatever works. We're not locked into one technological philosophy. Dr. Corvin was studying the holographic display again. This is quite remarkable from an anthropological perspective. Most species develop technology in a linear fashion, building upon their own previous discoveries. But humans seem to approach each problem as if it were completely new. Is that bad? Jake asked. Not bad, Dr. Corvin said slowly. Just different. Perhaps advantageous in certain situations. Zarathek, who had been resting quietly, spoke, up from her medical bed. Jake, may I ask you something? Sure, Zara. What's on your mind? When you were working on my suit, you seemed very calm. Were you not afraid of failure? Jake thought about the question for a moment. Of course I was. Afraid if I messed up you could have died. But being afraid doesn't mean you stop trying. But how could you proceed with such uncertainty? My people would never attempt repairs without complete understanding of the systems involved. Maybe that's the difference, Jake said. Humans are used to working with things we don't completely understand. We've been doing it our whole history. We built machines before we understood physics. We used electricity before we knew how it really worked. We flew in airplanes before we fully understood aerodynamics. Dr. Corvin looked intrigued. So you are saying that humans are comfortable with partial knowledge? More than comfortable, Jake replied. We're good at it. We're good at figuring out just enough to make something work and then improving it as we learn more. Captain Ford smiled. That's probably why humans have been so successful in galactic society, even though we're one of the youngest species. We adapt quickly. As they talked, Jake noticed that more crew members had gathered outside the medical bay. Through the transparent walls, he could see aliens from several different species watching their conversation with obvious interest. Word was spreading that the human had done something remarkable. Commander Veltar, a tall reptilian officer from the Saurian species, entered the medical bay. The Saurians were known for their military precision and technological prowess. They had been skeptical of human capabilities ever since humans joined the galactic community. Engineer Martinez, Commander Veltar said formally, I have reviewed the reports of your repair work. I must admit that I am surprised by your success. Thank you, Commander, Jake replied. However, I am curious about something. Your modifications appear to be temporary measures. What happens when this improvised system fails? Jake had been expecting this question. The repairs should last several weeks, maybe months. By then, we'll be back at a starbase where proper Vexhi replacement parts are available. But what if they fail sooner? What if your human technology proves inadequate? Then I'll fix it again, Jake said simply. Or find another way to solve the problem. Commander Veltar looked confused. You would attempt repairs again, even after a failure? Of course. That's how you learn what works and what doesn't. Dr. Corvin had been taking notes during the entire conversation. Commander Veltar, I believe we are witnessing a fundamental difference in problem-solving philosophy. Humans appear to view failure as part of the learning process, rather than as something to be avoided at all costs. Exactly, Jake agreed. Every failure teaches you something. Every mistake shows you what not to do next time. If you're afraid to fail, you'll never try anything difficult. Zarathek spoke up again from her bed. This is why you were willing to attempt repairs that others considered impossible. Right. The worst thing that could happen was that my repairs wouldn't work, and you'd be in the same situation you were already in. But if there was even a small chance of success, it was worth trying. Commander Veltar was quiet for a long moment, clearly thinking about what he had heard. Finally, he spoke. Engineer Martinez, your approach is very different from what my people would consider proper procedure. However, I cannot argue with your results. Captain Ford looked around, at all the alien faces watching them. I think what we're seeing here is why the galactic community benefits from having humans involved. We bring a different perspective to problems. Jake felt a little embarrassed by all the attention. I just fixed a broken machine. It's not that big a deal. But even as he said it, Jake could see that the other species did think it was a big deal. They were looking at him with a mixture of respect and curiosity that he had never experienced before. Dr. Corvin closed his notes and looked directly at Jake. Engineer Martinez, I believe you have demonstrated something very important today. You have shown that there are many ways to approach complex problems, and that sometimes the unconventional approach is the most effective. I guess so, Jake said. I just did what seemed logical to me. What Jake didn't realize was that his logical approach had challenged the fundamental assumptions that several alien species held about technology, problem-solving, and the nature of knowledge itself. And Zarathek, lying quietly on her medical bed, was thinking about how to properly express her gratitude for what he had done. In Vex High culture, saving someone's life created a debt that could only be repaid through the most sacred gesture their species knew. Jake had no idea what was coming. 3 days later, Zarathek was feeling much better. Jake's repairs had held perfectly and her vital signs were completely normal. Dr. Corvin had cleared her to return to light duty, though she still needed to be careful not to strain the modified systems. The Aurora Dawn had successfully passed through the debris field and was now approaching the unexplored star system they had come to study. The crisis was over, and the crew was returning to their normal routines. Jake was back in the engine room performing routine maintenance. The emergency repairs to the ship's hull had been completed, and everything was running smoothly again. He was happy to be back to his regular work, away from all the attention he had been getting since fixing Zarathek's suit. He was adjusting a power coupling when Captain Ford's voice came over the communication system. All crew members report to the main assembly hall for a special ceremony. This is mandatory for all personnel. Jake sighed. He hated formal ceremonies. They were usually boring speeches about duty and cooperation between species, but orders were orders, so he cleaned up his tools and headed to the assembly hall. When he arrived, he found the entire crew gathered in the large central room of the ship. Representatives from all 6 alien species were present, along with the 12 humans. Everyone was standing in a circle around the center of the room. Captain Ford was at the front, wearing her formal dress uniform. Next to her stood Zarathek, also in what appeared to be ceremonial clothing. Her environmental suit had been polished and decorated with intricate patterns that Jake had never seen before. Crew of the Aurora Dawn, Captain Ford began. We are gathered here to honor Engineer Jake Martinez for his extraordinary actions during our recent emergency. Through his quick thinking and innovative problem-solving, he saved the life of our colleague Zarathek. Jake felt his face turning red. He hated being the center of attention like this. He just wanted to go back to his engine room and work on machines that didn't stare at him. Captain Ford continued. Jake demonstrated the best qualities of human ingenuity and determination. His willingness to attempt what others considered impossible exemplifies the valuable contribution that humans make to our diverse crew. There was polite applause from the assembled crew members. Jake nodded awkwardly and hoped the ceremony would end soon. But then Zarathek stepped forward, and Jake could see that something important was about to happen. Her large compound eyes were focused on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. Jake Martinez, Zarathek said in her formal, precise way of speaking. You have given me the greatest gift possible. You have returned my life to me when all seemed lost. In my culture, such an act creates a sacred bond between us. Jake shifted nervously. You don't need to thank me, Zara. I was just doing my job. No, Zarathek said firmly. This was far beyond your duty. You risked everything to save me, and you succeeded where others had given up hope. According to the ancient traditions of my people, I must honor you with the most sacred gesture we possess. Dr. Corvin, who was standing nearby, looked suddenly concerned. Zarathek, perhaps you should consider the mixed species environment. But Zarathek was not listening. She had begun to unfasten the clasps of her environmental suit. The ritual of Chauvel Neth requires the complete removal of all artificial barriers between oneself and the one who has granted the gift of life. Jake watched in confusion as Zarathek began taking off her suit. Zara, what are you doing? I'm removing the artificial shell that separates me from the natural world, she explained as she continued unfastening clasps and disconnecting bio-support systems. To my people, clothing and environmental suits represent our separation from the truth of existence. By removing them in your presence, I demonstrate complete trust and vulnerability. The other crew members were watching with a mixture of fascination and alarm. Jake could see humans looking shocked, Centaurians appearing confused, and the crystalline Shardneth flickering with what might have been amusement. Zara, wait, Jake said, holding up his hands. You don't need to do this. Really, I appreciate the thought, but Zarathek had already removed the upper portion of her environmental suit, revealing the bio-mesh undergarments that regulated her body temperature and atmospheric needs. She began working on the lower sections. The Chauvel Neth cannot be interrupted once begun, she explained. To do so would be a grave insult to both the ritual and the one being honored. Commander Veltar stepped forward, his reptilian features showing clear disapproval. This is highly inappropriate for a public ceremony. Some species consider such displays to be territorial challenges. Dr. Corvin was frantically consulting a data pad. Captain Ford, in Centaurian culture, public disrobing is considered an assertion of dominance. We may have a diplomatic incident on our hands. The crystalline Shardneth began making musical chiming sounds that their translator devices interpreted as either laughter or territorial warnings. The other alien crew members were reacting according to their own cultural programming, and the situation was rapidly spiraling out of control. Captain Ford looked like she was trying to solve a complex engineering problem in her head. Zarathek, while we respect your cultural traditions, we need to consider the reactions of other species aboard this ship. But Zarathek had now removed her bio-mesh undergarments and was standing in the center of the assembly hall wearing only the biological regulators that were directly integrated into her skin. To her, this was the highest honor she could bestow. To everyone else, it looked like something completely different. Jake felt completely out of his depth. He had fixed machines his whole life, but he had no idea how to handle this kind of cultural crisis. Zara, I'm really honored, but maybe we could do this somewhere more private? The Chauvel Neth must be witnessed by the community, Zarathek replied. Otherwise, it has no meaning. The situation got worse when Lieutenant Commander Torres, one of the human officers, tried to step in. This is completely inappropriate. Someone needs to stop this right now. The Saurian crew members interpreted this as a challenge to their own territorial instincts and began making aggressive postures. The Centaurians started backing away, thinking the humans were claiming dominance over the ceremony. The Shardneth's musical sounds became more discordant. Jake realized that what had started as a simple thank you gesture was about to cause a major diplomatic incident involving multiple species. Everyone was misunderstanding everyone else, and it was all because of him. Stop, Jake shouted loudly enough to get everyone's attention. Everyone just stop for a minute. The room became quiet, but Jake could feel the tension in the air. Crew members from different species were eyeing each other suspiciously, ready to react to any perceived threat or insult. Jake looked at Zarathek, who was standing patiently in the center of the room, waiting to complete her ritual. Her large compound eyes showed confusion about why everyone was upset. "Zara," Jake said gently, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. What you're doing means something very different to other species than it does to your people." "How can honoring a life-giver be misunderstood?" she asked. Jake looked around at all the confused and concerned faces watching him. He realized that this was another kind of problem that needed solving, just like the broken environmental suit. But instead of fixing technology, he needed to fix a cultural breakdown. "Captain Ford," Jake said, "I think we need Dr. Corvin to explain what's happening here. Maybe if everyone understands what Zarathek is actually trying to do, we can figure out a solution that works for everyone." Captain Ford nodded gratefully. "Dr. Corvin, would you please explain Vex-High cultural traditions to the assembled crew?" As Dr. Corvin began explaining the concept of Chauvel Neth, Jake realized that being an engineer in a multi-species environment was a lot more complicated than he had ever imagined. Fixing machines was easy compared to fixing misunderstandings between different cultures. But just like with Zarathek's suit, Jake was determined to find a solution that worked for everyone involved. Dr. Corvin stood in the center of the assembly hall and cleared his throat. His tall, blue-skinned form commanded attention as he began to speak in his precise academic manner. "Fellow crew members," Dr. Corvin began, "what we are witnessing is a profound cultural ritual that has been practiced by the Vex-High people for thousands of years. The Chauvel Neth is not what other species might assume it to be." He gestured toward Zarathek, who stood patiently waiting to complete her ceremony. "To the Vex-High, artificial coverings represent separation from the natural world and from truth itself. When someone saves their life through intimate and personal intervention, the highest form of gratitude is to remove all barriers between themselves and their savior." Commander Veltar's reptilian features showed confusion. "But surely, such a display has territorial implications." "Not to the Vex-High," Dr. Corvin explained. "To them, this gesture represents complete vulnerability and trust. It is the opposite of a territorial challenge. It is a declaration that they place themselves entirely at the mercy of the one who saved them." One of the Shardnith crew members chimed a musical question that the translator interpreted as, "Why must this ritual be performed publicly?" "Because," Dr. Corvin continued, "the Vex-High believe that gratitude without witnesses has no meaning. The community must observe the ritual for it to have spiritual significance." Jake was listening carefully, trying to understand not just what Zarathek was doing but why it mattered so much to her. He realized that to her this was not embarrassing or inappropriate. It was sacred. Captain Ford spoke up. "Dr. Corvin, help us understand how the other species are interpreting this situation." Dr. Corvin nodded. "Certainly. The Saurians see public disrobing as a dominance display, which triggers their own territorial instincts. The Zentorians interpret it as a claim of social superiority. The Shardneth view it as either comedy or territorial marking, depending on the context." "And humans?" Captain Ford asked. "Humans have complex and varied reactions to nudity, often related to concepts of privacy, sexuality, or social appropriateness. However, humans also have a unique ability to understand that other species may have completely different cultural meanings for the same actions." Jake stepped forward. He had been thinking about the problem like an engineering challenge, and he thought he might have a solution. "What if we find a way to honor Zarathek's cultural needs while also respecting everyone else's cultural concerns?" Jake suggested. "Like when I fixed her suit, maybe we need to adapt the solution to work in a mixed environment." Dr. Corvin looked intrigued. "What do you propose?" Jake turned to address Zarathek directly. "Zara, you said the ritual requires removing artificial barriers between us, but what if we created a new kind of barrier that everyone could understand and respect?" Zarathek tilted her head, considering. "Explain this concept." Jake looked around the room at all the different species watching them. "What if we had a ceremony where you remove your environmental suit, which represents the artificial barrier between us, but then immediately put on something that represents the new bond between us? Something that shows our friendship and mutual respect?" "That is an interesting adaptation," Zarathek said slowly. But what would represent this new bond? Captain Ford stepped forward with a smile. I think I have an idea. She removed her own jacket, which bore the insignia of the Aurora Dawn and her rank as captain. Jake, would you be willing to wear this as a symbol of the respect and friendship that Zarathek wants to express? Jake looked at the jacket with surprise. Captain, I can't wear your uniform jacket. It's not about rank, Captain Ford explained. It's about creating a new ritual that works for everyone. Zarathek removes the artificial barrier of her environmental suit, and you accept the symbol of the bond between you. Dr. Corvin was taking notes rapidly. Fascinating. You are creating a hybrid ritual that respects the core meaning of the Vexhai tradition while adapting it to multi-species sensitivities. Zarathek considered the proposal for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. This adaptation honors the spirit of Chauvel Neth while showing respect for our diverse community. I find this acceptable. Jake nodded. If it makes Zarathek happy and keeps everyone else comfortable, I'm willing to try it. Captain Ford addressed the assembled crew. Let us proceed with this adapted ceremony. Zarathek will complete her traditional gesture of gratitude, and Jake will accept the symbol of their new bond. Zarathek finished removing her environmental suit and biomesh undergarments, standing briefly in her natural state as her culture required. Then Jake stepped forward and placed Captain Ford's jacket around her shoulders, creating a new kind of covering that represented their friendship rather than artificial separation. The crew watched with fascination as two different cultural traditions merged into something completely new. There was a moment of silence, and then spontaneous applause broke out from crew members of all species. Commander Veltar approached them with what might have been approval on his reptilian features. This adaptation shows wisdom and respect for all cultures involved. I'm impressed by the creative solution. The Shardneth chimed musical sounds that the translator interpreted as congratulations and approval. Even the normally formal Zentaurians seemed pleased with the outcome. Dr. Corvin closed his notes and approached Jake. Engineer Martinez, once again you have demonstrated the remarkable human ability to find solutions that others considered impossible. But this time, instead of engineering technology, you engineered a cultural bridge. Jake felt embarrassed by the praise. I just tried to find a way to make everyone happy. That is exactly my point, Dr. Corvin replied. Most species would have insisted on following their own cultural rules strictly. Humans seem uniquely capable of adapting and finding compromise solutions. Over the following days, Jake found himself in an unexpected new role aboard the ship. Crew members from different species began coming to him with cultural questions and conflicts. They had seen how he handled the situation with Zarathek, and they wanted his help with their own interspecies problems. Jake was not sure he was qualified to be a cultural advisor, but he approached each problem the same way he approached broken machines. He listened carefully to understand what each side needed, looked for the basic principles underneath the complex cultural details, and tried to find creative solutions that worked for everyone. Zarathek became one of his closest friends on the ship. She taught him about Vexhai engineering principles, which turned out to be surprisingly useful when combined with human improvisation techniques. In return, Jake helped her understand how other species thought and solved problems. 1 month later, Captain Ford called Jake to her office. Jake, I've been watching how you've been helping resolve cultural conflicts throughout the ship. The crew is working together better than ever before. Thank you, Captain. I just try to help when I can. I think your skills could be valuable beyond just this ship, Captain Ford continued. Starfleet Command has been looking for people who can help different species work together more effectively. They've asked me to recommend candidates for a new cultural liaison program. Jake was surprised. You want me to be a diplomat? I want you to be yourself, Captain Ford replied. You have a gift for finding practical solutions to complex problems, whether they involve technology or people. The galaxy needs more individuals who can bridge the gaps between different species. Jake thought about the offer. He had always been happy working with machines, but he had discovered that working with people could be just as rewarding. Would I still get to fix things? Captain Ford laughed. Jake, I think you'd be fixing the most important things of all. You'd be fixing the misunderstandings that keep different species from working together effectively. As Jake considered the opportunity, he realized that his approach to engineering had prepared him for much more than just repairing machines. The same principles that made him good at fixing broken technology made him good at fixing broken relationships between species. He had learned that every problem, whether mechanical or cultural, could be solved if you understood the basic principles involved and were willing to be creative with your solutions. Most importantly, he had learned that being human meant never giving up, even when other people said something was impossible. 3 months later, Jake Martinez became the first human cultural engineering specialist in the Galactic Fleet. His job was to travel between different ships and space stations, helping diverse crews learn to work together more effectively. And everywhere he went, he carried with him the lesson he had learned from fixing Zarathek's suit, that the most complex problems often had surprisingly simple solutions, if you were willing to look at them from a different perspective. The galaxy was full of different species with different ways of thinking, but Jake had discovered that underneath all the complexity, everyone wanted the same basic things: to be understood, to be respected, and to work together toward common goals. And if a human engineer from Earth could help make that happen, one broken machine and one cultural misunderstanding at a time, then maybe humanity really did have something special to offer the galaxy, after all. As Jake often said to new crew members he worked with, every problem has a solution. You just have to be